let me take you into a room where power is perfume. Thick, suffocating, expensive. A room where men in suits don't look at you unless they're looking down. A room where your worth is measured in numbers, titles, and the way people stand when you walk in. But today, they weren't standing for her. It began with a smack. A binder slamming against a table so violently the crystal water glasses vibrated. Then the CFO, Bradley Knox, pointed at the black woman standing near the door like she was clutter left behind. "Get her out." His voice ricocheted across the boardroom, hitting her like a physical blow. Executives turned. A few chuckled. Others pretended to check their phones. The only sound was the hum of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan like a kingdom observing its subjects. The woman, Amina Caldwell, stood still, holding 3 color-coded binders pressed to her chest like armor. Her badge said administrative assistant, though she'd been doing the work of 3 departments for years. She didn't speak, didn't fight. She just absorbed the humiliation like she'd done her entire life. The CEO adjusted his silver tie and glared at her. "Next time, try not to mix up the international appendix. You're not here to think, just to deliver binders. The real work happens at this table." Then he flicked his wrist dismissively. The binders she'd prepared all night, 200 pages of reorganized, corrected, proofread financials, hit the floor and burst open like a wound. Executives watched pages scatter across the polished wood like confetti thrown at a funeral. Amina bent down slowly, gathering the sheets while whispers slithered through the room. She shouldn't be in here anyway. Typical. Doesn't know her place. Assistants always get confused with real documents. Real documents, real work, real power, the things they thought she didn't have. But I want you to imagine kneeling on a glossy floor while millionaires watch you like you're an inconvenience. Imagine your hands shaking while they judge you for the tremor. Imagine knowing you're smarter than half the room. But none of that matters because they are not looking for brilliance. They're looking for someone to blame. She kept her eyes on the paper, her breathing steady, but I promise you, inside her chest, a storm was building, and no one saw it coming. The room itself was a temple to wealth. Leather chairs stitched by Italian craftsmen, a hand-woven Persian rug worth more than an entire neighborhood's rent, and a custom crystal light fixture dripping from the ceiling like a chandelier in a billionaire's cathedral. There was a long table so glossy it reflected the ceiling lights like a lake. The executives behaved like royalty. Assistants, interns, janitors, service staff. They were ghosts. They moved quietly, unobtrusively, so they didn't disrupt the men who believed they ran the world. That day, the oppressor at the head of the table, CFO Knox, sat with his hands clasped behind his head and his feet up on a $40,000 conference chair. His laugh was the kind you heard in country clubs where they talk about diversity only when the PR team forces them to. A corporation is like a ship, he liked to say. Some people steer it. Some people scrub the deck. He always made clear where he thought Amina belonged. And yet, there was something he couldn't see, because arrogance blinds even the intelligent. Amina was quiet, yes. Polite, yes. Invisible, yes. But when she thought no one was watching, she read the documents she copied. She studied the contracts she printed. She deciphered the financial models she stapled and delivered. She solved the problems executives argued about through lunch. She had a brain that sliced through complexity like a scalpel. She spoke 4 languages fluently, including French, though she never used it aloud in the office. She understood numbers the way musicians understand notes. Instinctively, naturally, with unfathomable precision. But none of that mattered in a world that didn't care about your ability. Only your label. You see, Amina didn't end up as an assistant because she wasn't capable. She ended up there because life threw storms at her faster than she could build shelter. Her father died when she was 16, collapsing at his second job from exhaustion. Her mother cleaned offices until her bones screamed. Amina took scholarships, loans, night classes, anything. But the world doesn't pause for your tragedies. When her brother was arrested, she sent every spare dollar to help him. When her mother fell sick, she dropped internships to care for her. When rent rose faster than her paycheck, she took any job that offered insurance. The assistant job at Stone March Global had benefits. Benefits were survival, and survival was the only promotion she had time for back then. Still, late at night, when the office was silent, Amina stayed behind. Not because she was paid to, but because she was preparing for a future no one else could see. She read investment filings the executive team ignored. She memorized EU business regulations out of curiosity. She took online courses in corporate strategy. She translated French contracts for fun. And she never said a word. That is what made her dangerous. The danger revealed itself at 10:42 a.m. The acquisition, the biggest corporate deal of the decade, suddenly imploded. A French tech conglomerate was seated across from the executives, reviewing the documents when they discovered a clause that appeared mistranslated. A licensing agreement, a critical one. A single wrong phrase could cost billions. "We cannot sign this," the French lead negotiator announced, cold and offended. "This clause is unacceptable." Knox exploded. "This is a translation error. Someone messed up the document handling." Everyone looked at Amina, always the easiest person to blame. The CEO's voice cracked like a whip. "Are you telling me you misdelivered the documents? Do you have any idea what's at stake here?" She inhaled. "Sir, if I may—" "No," Knox snapped. "You've said enough." And that was the last straw. Everything they had done to her, every dismissal, every slight, every humiliation, forged something inside her that could not be contained any longer. She stepped forward before she realized her feet had moved. Her voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "The issue is not the translation." Knox froze. The room stopped breathing. Amina stepped to the table, opened the disputed document, and turned it toward the French delegation. "This copy is outdated. The corrected appendix arrived Tuesday at 3:14 p.m. New York time. Your team updated the licensing clause to comply with EU technology export regulations. I flagged the update in the system and forwarded it to the internal review team, but it was never processed." Then she switched into perfect, unaccented French. "La clause protège vos intérêts autant que les nôtres. Le problème n'est pas le langage. C'est que la version correcte a été ignorée en interne." Silence. Real silence. The kind that slices through a room and leaves it bleeding. Executives stared at her like she had grown wings. The French delegation stared like they had just seen salvation walk into the room. Knox's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Amina didn't stop. Her hand moved swiftly, flipping pages, cross-referencing clauses, citing EU code numbers, explaining tax implications, effortlessly, boldly, accurately. She broke down the licensing barrier in under 2 minutes, then presented a solution so elegant, the senior negotiator actually gasped. The entire boardroom, filled with billion-dollar egos, went dead quiet. When she finished speaking, one of the French executives whispered, "Incroyable." A moment passed. Then another. Then the CEO stood up so slowly the room tensed like he was about to explode. But he didn't explode. He looked at Amina as if seeing her for the first time. And Knox. Knox looked like a man watching his own downfall happen in slow motion. The CEO turned to the French delegation. "Is her explanation correct?" The lead negotiator nodded. "Completely. Without her, we would have terminated the deal." And that was the moment everything flipped. The CEO did something no one in that room expected. He walked around the table, past the stunned executives, past Knox, whose face had gone the color of wet paper, and stopped directly in front of Amina. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Have you been able to do that?" His voice wasn't mocking anymore. It wasn't irritated. It was something far more dangerous. Respectful. Amina held his gaze. "Years, sir." You could feel the shame crawling up the walls. Every executive suddenly remembered the times they'd brushed past her, snapped at her, handed her their mess to clean up, and never once wondered what she was capable of. Knox tried to save himself. "This is highly irregular," he blurted. "She bypassed protocol. She's an assistant, for God's sake. We can't just take her word." "We didn't," the French negotiator cut in. "We took her logic, and it is far stronger than the arguments your CFO made in the past 3 meetings. The hit landed. Hard. The CEO turned slowly, his eyes now locked on Knox with a coldness that could freeze steel. "Bradley," he said, "step outside." Knox laughed weakly. "Come on, this is ridiculous. She's showboating. You're going to jeopardize a $40 billion deal because some assistant wants to play hero." The CEO's voice dropped into a tone that ended careers. "I said, step outside." The room watched Knox shuffle to the door, his arrogance evaporating with each step. When it closed behind him, the air felt lighter. You ever see a bully get escorted out of their own kingdom? It doesn't look cinematic. It looks pathetic. When the door latched, the CEO turned back to Amina. "What's your last name?" "Caldwell." "How long have you been with us, Miss Caldwell?" 5 years. "And in those 5 years, how many times have you corrected our mistakes?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "More times than I can count." He studied her, really studied her, not her clothes, not her position, not the label on her badge, her. He nodded once, a decision locking into place. Then he looked at everyone else. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "it appears we've been blind." He walked back to his seat at the head of the table. But when he sat down, something was different. The power in the room shifted. It had started flowing toward the woman standing with a binder in her hands and fire in her eyes. "Miss Caldwell," the CEO said, "effective immediately. You are no longer an administrative assistant." The room inhaled. "You'll serve as interim director of global strategy for this acquisition. You will have full decision-making authority over international documentation, compliance, and cross-border negotiation support. Your compensation," he glanced at the stunned HR director, "will be adjusted accordingly, drastically." Someone actually choked on their water. One of the executives spluttered, "Sir, with all due respect, that's exactly what this company should have done years ago." The CEO snapped, "We reward competence. We promote talent. Unless that's changed, and no one told me." No one spoke, because no one could argue without exposing themselves. Amina stared at him, stunned. Sir, I, I appreciate... He stopped her with a raised hand, and then pointed to the chair directly beside him. Sit here, he said. If you're going to save this deal, you're going to do it from the table, not from the door. The sound you heard next? That was the sound of hierarchy breaking. For the first time in 5 years, Amina sat at the table. Not at the edge, not against the wall. At the center, right beside the CEO. The French delegation watched with quiet amusement, exchanging looks like they were witnessing an American corporate morality play. Shall we proceed? The CEO asked them. The lead negotiator nodded. With Ms. Caldwell involved, yes. We are satisfied. The deal moved forward at a pace that shocked everyone. Every time a clause needed clarification, Amina had it. When tax implications came up, she pulled out cross-border models she'd studied at midnight. When cultural misunderstandings threatened to derail trust, she stepped in with calm translations, both linguistic and human. Executives who once ignored her started texting her for guidance during breaks. People who never learned her name suddenly said, "Amina, what do you think?" and waited, actually waited for her response. In 2 hours, she did what they couldn't do in 6 months. By the time pens finally scratched across the final page, and both sides stood up to shake hands, the French CEO gripped Amina's hand a little longer than everyone else's. "If you ever want to work in Paris," he murmured, "you call me." You felt that? That was the sound of the world opening. But this story doesn't end with one promotion, one deal, one humiliation flipped. This is about a black woman who started in the shadows and became head of a Fortune 500. So let me show you what happens after the applause stops. Because the fight isn't over when you get a seat at the table. Sometimes that's when the claws come out. Later that afternoon, after the French delegation left and the ink on the deal was still drying, there was a closed-door emergency meeting on the 47th floor. Inside sat the board. They were agitated, whispering about optics, precedent, emotional decisions by the CEO. A woman leaping from assistant to director in one afternoon? To them, that wasn't a win. It was a threat. "We cannot let one dramatic meeting dictate our promotion policies," one board member said. "We need process, vetting, background checks." Another scoffed. "This will embolden the staff. Everyone will think they can bypass the chain of command." A third. "Knox is on the warpath. He's already calling his contacts. Says he'll be railroaded by someone who was delivering coffee last week." The CEO listened, his expression unreadable. "Gentlemen," he said finally, "watch the numbers." He slid a report across the table. Projections updated in real time after the acquisition was secured under terms more favorable than anticipated. Ms. Caldwell salvaged this deal from the brink because she understood it better than all of us. The market will not care what title she had yesterday. It will only care that the stock price goes up tomorrow. He paused, and it will. The room slowed. The language of power will always be money. In the weeks that followed, Amina's promotion sent shockwaves through the company. Some people were inspired. Assistants whispered her name like a secret prayer. Analysts looked at their own hidden talents and wondered if maybe, just maybe, they were allowed to dream bigger. Others were furious. Knox, temporarily on leave, launched a quiet campaign to discredit her. He dug for mistakes in her file. None surfaced. He tried to frame her rise as a diversity stunt. The numbers shredded that narrative. Within a quarter, the acquisition, under her strategic oversight, outperformed expectations by a staggering margin. She coordinated integration across time zones, soothed client concerns, fixed misaligned data systems, and renegotiated vendor contracts that had been bleeding the company for years. The board couldn't argue with a 23% bump in international revenue. Still, they resisted. They tested her with impossible workloads. They scrutinized her emails. They made her present alone in rooms where men bonded over golf trips and Ivy League pedigrees, waiting for her to crack, to confirm their bias that she was an anomaly, a fluke, an overhyped assistant who got lucky once. She did not crack. When they gave her 48 hours to untangle a compliance issue that threatened a lawsuit, she did it in 24. When a subsidiary in Brazil misreported numbers and everyone panicked about an audit, she built a forensic model overnight and calmly presented the solution in the morning. Her work didn't just meet the standard, it raised it. You want to know what terrifies fragile power? Someone who was never supposed to be in the room becoming the reason the building doesn't burn down. Fear turned to grudging respect. Respect turned to reliance. And reliance? That's the beginning of power. 2 years later, she wasn't just the director of global strategy. She was executive vice president. Her office moved to the corner. Glass walls, city view. People knocked now instead of just walking in. Her calendar was filled with advisory calls from people who once couldn't remember her face. Her salary multiplied. Her mother got the health care she deserved. Her brother got a lawyer who actually fought for him. She paid off debts, hers and her family's. She funded scholarships at the school that once told her, "People like you don't usually end up in high finance." She didn't announce those things. She just did them. Meanwhile, Knox tried to rise again. He resurfaced at a rival firm and started whispering that Stonemarch was over-reliant on one-star employee, that it was dangerous to let emotionally motivated promotions drive corporate structure. He laughed at her behind closed doors, said executives were indulging in a redemption fantasy to ease their guilt. You can't sanitize jealousy. It always bleeds through. Then came the crisis. Not a contract clause this time. Not a mistranslation. A full-blown market catastrophe. An overseas partner collapsed under scandal. Regulators knocked at Stonemarch's door. The stock plummeted. Media headlines screamed about corporate negligence and questioned leadership competence. Rumors swirled that the CEO would step down. Whispers about succession moved like smoke through the upper floors. The board panicked. "We need stability," one of them said. "Someone the market trusts, someone with a track record." They all turned, almost in unison, to the numbers. On paper, only one senior leader had a spotless record with simultaneous spikes in revenue, risk management, and international expansion. Her. They called her into a private meeting. The room was smaller than the boardroom where she once knelt on the floor picking up scattered papers. No windows this time. Just a long table, a pot of coffee, and eyes that had once ignored her, now studying her, like a last lifeline. The chairman cleared his throat. "Miss Caldwell, we have an offer." They laid it out flat. CEO, the top seat. Head of Stonemarch Global Holdings, a Fortune 500 with influence over markets she used to only read about behind the scenes. "We need someone the public trusts," the chairman said. "Someone who can steady this ship. The markets respond well to you. Our partners do. Our employees do. You're the only one with cross-divisional credibility and international rapport." He didn't say the rest. "You're the only one who hasn't lied to us. You're the only one who saves us when we break things." She remembered the boardroom 5 years ago. the binder on the floor. Knox's finger pointed at her, the CEO telling her she didn't belong during a $40 billion negotiation. She remembered the assistants in the break room talking about rent, the security guard who worked doubles but was still invisible, the cleaning staff who were only acknowledged when someone complained, but never when they stayed late scrubbing other people's mess. She remembered what it felt like to work in the shadows. And she realized something. If she took this role, she could change what kind of light this company cast. "I'll accept," she said, steady as bedrock. "On one condition." They braced themselves. "Bring me the compensation report," she said, broken down by race and gender, all levels, all divisions. "Then, when I step into that role, we start fixing it, publicly." Their discomfort was loud. "That's ambitious," the chairman said. She smiled slightly. "So is staying in business." A pause, then a nod. Done. The press conference went global. News anchors said phrases like historic moment and shattering the glass ceiling. Some called it a PR stunt, others called it long overdue. Think pieces appeared overnight, dissecting her biography, her rise, her impact. Stock analysts pinned their forecasts to her appointments. Social media flooded with clips of black women in offices watching her speech with tears in their eyes. She stepped to the podium in a tailored black suit, no apology in her posture. Lights flashed. "5 years ago," she said, "I delivered binders to a room that didn't know my name." The audience laughed, a little awkwardly. "Today," she continued, "I sign my name to lead this company. But this isn't just about me. It's about everyone who's ever been told to stand outside while decisions that affect their lives and livelihoods are made inside closed rooms." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The world was listening. "We will not be a company that only sees people when they're convenient. We will not be an organization that treats talent like background noise. I know what it's like to work in the shadows, and I intend to make sure no one who carries this place on their back is left in the dark again." Her mother watched from a small apartment in Queens, pressing a tissue to her mouth, eyes shaking. Her brother watched from a re-entry halfway house, surrounded by men who whispered, "That's your sister?" The assistants at Stone March watched from break rooms, conference huddle corners, and their desks, hands hovering over keyboards, stunned into stillness. Back at the rival firm, Knox watched too. He laughed once. Then he saw the market response. Stone March's stock, which had been bleeding red, ticked upward. Then again, then again. Analysts praised her plan to restructure internal accountability, to increase transparency, to reorganize leadership priorities around actual performance instead of old loyalty networks. "Maybe they're buying the fairy tale," his colleagues sneered. Knox didn't answer, because deep down, he recognized something that terrified him more than her promotion did. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was competence finally wearing the crown it had always deserved. Months passed. Under her leadership, Stone March shifted. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. She instituted rotational programs that forced senior executives to shadow lower-level employees for a week each year. Some hated it, but some came out changed, suddenly aware of the people who held together the pieces they took for granted. She expanded scholarships, paid internships, and mentoring programs for Black and brown students who had been told that Wall Street wasn't for them. She installed transparent promotion criteria. No more opaque fit excuses. No more unexplained jumps for people who only happened to play golf with the right partner. Did it solve everything? Of course not. Racism doesn't evaporate with a press conference. Bias doesn't melt because you put a black woman in the big chair. There were people who wanted her to fail. People who waited for one misstep. People who whispered that she was too emotional, then that she was too cold, then that she was too ambitious, then that she should be grateful and quiet. She did not become quiet. She became precise. Each quarter that passed with stronger performance strangled another excuse not to listen to women like her. And in the hallways, in the cafeterias, in the elevators, people who once stared past her now moved aside respectfully. Not just because she was the CEO, not just because she could hire or fire them. Because they had watched her, they had seen the receipts. They knew, whether they admitted it or not, that the woman they once saw picking up binder pages off a polished floor now held the company's fate in her hands. And she was steady. Now, let me ask you this. How many Amina Caldwells are walking through offices right now, holding coffee trays, fixing PowerPoints at midnight, catching mistakes in documents they were never invited to comment on? How many work in shadows while people like Knox collect the spotlight? This story, her story, is not a fantasy. It is a possibility. Because here's the truth. Brilliance does not always walk in through the front door wearing a tailored suit and a title. Sometimes, brilliance is the woman no one notices until their empire starts to crumble, and she's the only one who knows how to keep it standing. Sometimes, dignity is the person who picks up pages off a floor while the powerful laugh, and still comes back the next day, prepared, focused, unbroken. Sometimes, justice is not a gavel slam or a choir of angels. Sometimes, it's a promotion letter, a nameplate on a door, a woman walking into the boardroom and not stopping at the wall, a black woman, the one they told to get out, the one they tried to blame, the one they thought was small, until she was sitting at the head of the table, signing off on decisions and looking around at the faces of people who once refused to look at her. And in that moment, she is not screaming, not gloating, not throwing binders. She is just present, whole, unapologetic. She remembers the shadows. She remembers the humiliation. She remembers every whispered insult, every slammed door, every time someone used their power to shrink her. And then she does the most radical thing. She builds a world where the next woman like her doesn't have to crawl through the same fire to be seen. So the next time you walk past someone refilling the coffee cart, someone with an assistant badge, someone answering phones with tired eyes but razor-sharp attention, ask yourself, are you looking at a background extra in your story? Or are you standing next to the future head of a Fortune 500? Because the difference isn't their potential. The difference is whether you choose to see it. And if you don't worry. One day they'll be sitting at the head of the table and you'll finally notice them. You'll call it a miracle. They'll call it overdue.